Good morning. It's Saturday morning. I believe it's October 22nd. I find it interesting that I even need to make this Facebook Live video, that I need to even do this. But let me start out by saying one thing. There will be no COVID-19 vaccine mandates for school to attend children under my watch. There will not be. And I would ask Tim Walz, what do you say? What are you going to say to the millions of Minnesota parents and voters? Because I think they deserve to know. I know you won't be at the debate tomorrow night, but you still need to speak up on this issue. So let's roll up our sleeves and get to it. We're talking about the CDC's unanimous vote to place COVID-19 vaccines on the childhood immunization schedule. This has happened over the last couple of days. I have done a tremendous amount of reading trying to get the specifics, and it looks like we're looking at an addition to the childhood immunization schedule of approximately 3 more vaccines potentially for COVID-19. So what's the first thing we have to consider? Right out of the blocks, the first thing, it has to be about you. It has to be about parent rights. It has to be about your health freedom. It has to be about your children's health freedom. That has to be the starting point. We're America. We govern ourselves under a constitution. We have freedom and rights. So that's where it starts. Okay. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. And then later it goes on to say, and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do establish and ordain. We are trying to secure the blessings of liberty to our posterity. That's the first point. The second point, we had Dr. Benjamin Rush 250 years ago talking about the need for health freedom, and we've never seen it more apparent than over the last 3 years, where literally Americans have felt like their freedoms have been undercut. We see almost weekly now folks who were fired for not violating their moral compass now being asked if they want to come back and join the workforce. Think about that. Okay, let's talk next about parental rights. When parents have children, they're not making a contract with the government to say, okay, we will co-parent these kids alongside of your policies. No, parents have children and the children are the parents. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I've already spoken about the Constitution. I think it's important to remember the words of President Eisenhower when he left after serving 2 terms as president. He made the comment in a speech, his farewell speech, that there might come a day where a scientific and technological elite might literally control our public health policies. Think about that. Okay, so I'm going to stand for health freedom. I'm going to stand for parental rights as I have for the last, my entire lifetime. But I'll say this, I've been perhaps a leading voice over the last 30 months, and I will continue to be. Okay, let's go to policy now. When we talk about policy emanating from government, we oftentimes think of the CDC and the FDA, and we have to talk about what are the standards for these policies. Now, if people question policies from the government, frequently they're called conspiracy theorists or deniers of something, or skeptics, or quacks, or whatever. But there's every reason in the world why we're having this conversation together today, and why parents are up in arms, not just in Minnesota, but across America. Let me share with you what I received from one legislative analyst. Now, I did not specifically go back and read these bills or fact check them, but I did receive them from a qualified legislative analyst in Minnesota. And this is what he shared with me. There are bills in Minnesota that would undercut parental rights, health freedom, and potentially force COVID-19 vaccines onto children in order for them to attend school, private schools, or daycare. Let me read these bills in a synopsis. First off, this bill here, Minnesota Senate File 2554. It seeks to remove the conscientious exemption vaccines for all school-age children in Minnesota. It applies to home schools as well. That's one. Here's another one. Senate File 2553 seeks to allow minors as young as 12 to consent to COVID-19 and all CDC recommended vaccinations. Here's one. Minnesota Senate File 3791 seeks to alter the daycare and school immunization statute to allow daycares to deny children with exemptions. The Senate author was Senator Matt Klein, which is interesting because Matt Klein is a physician, and I don't know if he does much vaccination of children. I don't know if he's ever had to sit with a mom and a dad whose child has just had a fever develop from a vaccine of 102 and then suffered a febrile seizure, and they don't know if their child has a brain tumor, a simple febrile seizure, or a diagnosis of epilepsy that will follow them the rest of their lives. But let me read that again to you. Seeks to alter the daycare and school immunization statute to allow daycares to deny children with exemptions. So these are children with exemptions, but daycares still get to deny them. And then here's another one. This one also is, first author listed is Senator Matt Klein. Seeks to mandate the COVID vaccine for all public and non-public school employees. So if you're an employee of a public school or an employee of a non-public school, you have to get the COVID vaccine, according to this bill led by Senator Matt Klein. So people who are raising this issue are not conspiracy theorists. They're simply paying attention, and they have every right to. But let's get back to the CDC and the FDA, and what standards do they operate by? They operate by two major things. And this is what I've been living with for 40 years plus. Is something effective, and is it safe? Well, over the last 48 hours, we have heard epidemiologists who are involved with the CDC bemoan the fact that they can't get their hands around effectiveness and safety for kids because there aren't enough kids getting vaccinated that they can observe. Now think about that. Isn't that putting the cart before the horse? This epidemiologist is saying, well, if we would have more parents vaccinating their kids with this COVID-19 vaccine, we would be able to watch more what the results are. I don't want to be overly inflammatory, but doesn't that almost sound like the epidemiologist is saying, we can't know how safe or effective this vaccine or this vaccine regimen is unless we have more kids being vaccinated? Doesn't that, at some level, strike a bit of terror in your heart? This document came from the CDC. This was out yesterday, and it was a summary. It's the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report that comes from the CDC. Summary. And they're talking about a specific topic. And the topic is this: mRNA vaccine effectiveness against COVID-19 associated hospitalizations wanes over time. Less is known about the durability of protection during the Omicron period. So let me just put that into different words. Basically, they're saying that vaccines are less effective regarding the prevention of hospitalizations over time. And we don't know enough, or as much as we'd like, during the Omicron period of time. So then this CDC report says this. What is added by this report, the report that came out yesterday? It says 3-dose vaccine effectiveness. So you get dose 1, you get dose 2, you get dose 3. 3-dose vaccine effectiveness decreased after 120 days from vaccination, down to 29%. Okay, what does that mean? That means that if you take 3 doses, after 4 months, 120 days after the last dose, the vaccine effectiveness dropped to 29%. So you remember the days where we were being told it was 70, 80, 85%. It drops to 29% after you take the third dose. Then it goes on to say, what are the implications for public health practice? It says this. This is their conclusion after what I just told you. Eligible adults over 18 years should receive an updated bivalent COVID-19 mRNA vaccine to maximize protection against associated hospitalization. So they're saying you've had one, you've had two, you've had three. Now the bivalent one, the vaccine that has two different shapes to the spike protein that might enhance the breadth of antibody protection, should be given. So you should take number 4, and it should be the bivalent one. You can understand why people are concerned. This is terribly important. So in terms of efficacy, the CDC comes out yesterday and acknowledges the efficacy drops dramatically, such that 4 months after getting the third dose, you're down to 29% efficacy, and they're talking about hospitalization. I think in terms of safety, the question's still out there. And I don't think that we want to be that society or that state that belittles or holds someone else in contempt because they don't see the issue of COVID-19 mRNA vaccine safety as settled science. I think science is still breathing and taking shape and giving us information. So safety, if you look at the VAERS data, even pro-vaccine zealots would say that it's concerning. But I think we can say from an effectiveness and a safety perspective, there's much to be questioned. And I would say this, as a practicing physician, and I'm still seeing patients 4 days a week, trust is elusive. If you fracture trust, if you lose trust, it's hard to rebuild it. It's hard to regain it. And what I'm seeing in the office is I'm seeing concerned parents sort of shrugging their shoulders and saying, Doc Jensen, in terms of having that MMR, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine for my child, I know we got the first dose, but we decided to hold off on the second one. Or the same conversation with, that we know we're due for the diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, but we're going to hold off right now. We're just a little skittish. There is a spillover effect going on in the minds of parents who've routinely utilized the childhood immunization schedule to guide what they say yes and what they say no to. I think it's also important that when we look at policies, that we look at other nations. If we look at here on my laptop, it says this: Europe has a mixture of mandatory and recommended policies regarding vaccines, but most European countries do not have mandatory vaccine or vaccination. Most countries in the Americas, 29 out of 35, have mandatory vaccines. This is why, on the eve of an election, Minnesotans, Americans want to know, what is your position on health freedom and parental rights? I applaud Carrie Lake out of Arizona and Ron DeSantis out of Florida for speaking clearly. No, on their watch, there will not be mandated vaccines required in order for your child to attend school. I stand with them, and there are many governors that stand with them. And this is not entirely a partisan issue. Democrat governor candidates have stepped up and said that in the wake of the CDC vote 15-0 to put COVID-19 vaccines on the children's immunization schedule, that they will not be mandating that, or they will not be supporting that. I would ask you to do some homework. If you put in the Google box a comparison of recommended or required vaccines in European countries and the United States, you'll be shocked at the difference. We're looking literally at the immunization schedule, the recommended immunization schedule in Minnesota. It is more than double the number of recommended vaccine antigens that children might receive in Europe. Now let's turn our attention to doctors, to providers. Physicians, if I could just speak to you, I know that there are some of you out there probably just scowling at me right now, angrier than all get out, holding me in contempt. But could you just press pause for a moment? Our patients need our help. Our patients expect us to grab onto the words of Hippocrates, primum non nocere, first do no harm. There's enough question marks out there regarding mRNA vaccines, regarding the virulence and the transmissibility of the Omicron variant. The VAERS data has some concerning data points that we want to look at. So let's not fall into the trap of demanding that our patients see the world the way we do. As physicians, we've always been at our best when we elevate bedside manner to mean we first seek to understand our patients. Then we try to help our patients understand our perspective. But we have to start by listening and learning, what is our patient thinking? Seek first to understand, then be understood. Wise words from an author named Stephen Covey. We need to understand that disagreement with our patients doesn't mean we need to abandon them, that we need to dismiss them from our practice. These are folks just like you and me. We just happen to have taken a different academic track. We have a different life experience in the workplace. But these patients who might not agree with you or me, they're not stupid and they're not disagreeable. They're thoughtful human beings using their perspective, their smarts, their brains to come to a conclusion that they think is best for themselves and their children. And then it comes down to me. Yes, my name is Scott Jensen, and I'm running to be the next governor of Minnesota. I've been called many things. I've been called extreme. And perhaps this Facebook video will provide fodder for more people to call me extreme. I don't see myself that way. I do see myself as skeptical. I see myself as vaccinated. I'm up to date on diphtheria and pertussis and tetanus. I've had my protection in place that I need. My children have been vaccinated according to what my wife and I thought. I spend $250,000 a year almost buying vaccines for my patients. Our clinic will provide more than 1,000 doses of influenza vaccine to patients this season. But you know what? Every one of those vaccines will be administered to a person who says yes. None of them will be administered to a person who says no. None of the patients will be held down and forced to take a jab that they don't want. They will be provided informed consent, and they will say yes, and we'll provide the vaccine, as we do with measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, polio, and many others. I want to speak for the common good, and I think the common good is trust. We're going to have more pandemics. We're going to have more epidemics. We're going to have more outbreaks. But if we don't have trust, we are not going to be able to rally the troops and get everybody to get on board. And it will be physicians' faults. It'll be policymakers' faults. Dr. Walensky from the CDC has already acknowledged that the CDC has done a lousy job of communicating with people, of building trust. So let me say this. I stand for health freedom. I stand for parental rights. As governor, I would like a health freedom amendment. And embedded within that amendment, I would like a vaccine bill of rights that always provides for exceptions, exemptions on a conscientious or a religious basis. I will not allow mandated COVID-19 vaccines in order for kids to go to daycare or to school. I know exactly where I stand on this issue. And I am a person who vaccinates patients, has vaccinated my children, has encouraged the vaccination of my grandchildren, and who personally has been vaccinated as well. I do strive to do that which is good for the common good. The other day, a blood bank called me, and they said, we need plasma. We're running short. You've given to us before. Can you do it again? I said, yes. I carved out 2 hours of my time so I could go down and give plasma, about a quart of it, a couple days ago. When you're done giving plasma, you feel a little less energetic. It takes a little while to replace that quart of intravascular fluid volume. But I was willing to pay that price. And I will continue to get my vaccines as I choose. But it has to be choice. So when the CDC comes out and says what they did yesterday, I would tell Minnesotans, I would tell Minnesota parents, I would tell Minnesota voters, with Scott Jensen at the helm, you will not be forced or mandated to do this. But I think you have a legitimate question that should be ruminating through your mind. And I think that question is this: where does Tim Walz stand? Tim Walz has already demonstrated a willingness to lock you down in terms of your business and to lock kids out, even if data demonstrates that it's a bad idea. And he will lock in frail elderly people in facilities infested with COVID-19 where their lives are at risk, and frequently these people died alone without the comfort and assurance that comes with being with a loved one. So I think you have to ask Tim Walz this. Where do you stand, Tim Walz? Because Scott Jensen's been more than clear. COVID-19 vaccines, just because they've been placed on the childhood immunization schedule by the CDC, will not be mandated to attend school, private, public, or whatever, or to attend daycare. On my watch, that's not happening. And to all of us, I would remind us of the words of Hippocrates: primum non nocere. First, do no harm. Those are wise words to follow. Thanks for listening. And this conversation is incredibly important for every American, even if you're not thinking about the specific COVID-19 vaccine policy change from the CDC yesterday. When we're talking health freedom and parental rights, we can't help but think about where is government intrusion going to happen next.